a simultaneous mass attack targeting Hezbollah members in Lebanon. Devices used for communication exploded, injuring thousands and killing several. Hezbollah is blaming Israel, so is there a risk of a bigger conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Israel and the Lebanon-based group Hezbollah have been engaged in cross-border conflicts since Israel's war on Gaza began nearly a year ago. Concerns over wider conflict are now growing after a series of coordinated attacks targeted Hezbollah members in Lebanon on Tuesday. They came a day after the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he'll make it a goal of his war on Gaza to return the thousands of Israelis displaced by the violence in northern Israel. Hezbollah has blamed Israel for the pager explosions that injured more than 2,500 people and is promising retaliation. Israel is yet to comment, but its army is deploying additional forces to its northern border with Lebanon. So what will Hezbollah's response look like, and is there a risk of a wider conflict? We'll put that to our guests shortly. First, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Thousands of explosions across Lebanon and in Syria. From a cyber attack that turned pagers held by Hezbollah members into weapons. Of the thousands of injuries, hundreds are in a critical state, with some losing fingers, suffering serious abdominal injuries and being left blind. The Iranian ambassador to Lebanon is among them, although reports say his injuries are slight. Lebanon's hospitals have been overwhelmed, and the death toll is still rising. Many of those hit were Hezbollah fighters, although some carrying the pagers held other roles within the group, like medics, and one was a young girl. Another, Mohammed Mahdi Ammar, the son of Hezbollah Member of Parliament Ali Ammar.
This is a new Israeli aggression against Lebanon, and the resistance will retaliate in a suitable way at a suitable time.
A Hezbollah official has reportedly called this the biggest security breach the group has faced in the past year of conflict with Israel. It's not yet clear how it was carried out, with speculation on whether explosives had been inserted into the pagers before they were distributed. Hezbollah members had recently started using pagers because it was believed they were less likely to be tracked than smartphones. Hezbollah squarely blames Israel.
We blame the Israeli enemy. They bear full responsibility for this criminal attack that also harms civilians. The treacherous and criminal enemy will get the fair punishment for this cowardly attack.
But Israel has so far remained silent. And its powerful ally, the US, denied having any prior knowledge of Tuesday's attack.
There's no US involvement in this at all.
A sentiment the US has maintained since Hezbollah and Israel began their cross-border conflict in response to the war on Gaza. But that hasn't stopped tensions rising and the conflict expanding, with both sides hitting deeper across the Israel-Lebanese border, and Israel carrying out a high-level assassination of a Hezbollah leader in Beirut in July. So many are left asking whether this, the strike to have hit the largest number of Hezbollah members and to threaten its security, was a one-off attack or the start of a much bigger conflict. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. In Beirut, Ayman Mhanna, Executive Director of the Kassir Foundation, which focuses on freedom of expression and media development in the Levant region. In Washington, D.C., Firas Maksad, a Senior Director at the Middle East Institute and an expert on the politics of Lebanon and Syria and the broader dynamics of the Middle East region. And in Laurel, Maryland, is Colin Clarke, Director of Research at the Soufan Group, that's a global intelligence and security consultancy. A very warm welcome to each of you. We have so much to get through, but I want to start with Ayman in Beirut. Ayman, the people of Lebanon who have been through so much already and probably thought they had seen it all, how are they feeling today?
There's a feeling of fear. And now we're almost sure that we have not seen it all. That the future, the next few days, might carry developments that can go in any possible direction, including the worst ones. And this situation of fear, of uncertainty, of not knowing whether our kids will be able to go to school tomorrow or not, is something that is pervasive. You feel it in the way you interact with people, you feel it in the jokes, the dark humor that is spreading so widely online, but it's all only a facade for a country that is in real fear. Those who are opposed to Hezbollah are very much afraid that the militant group is bringing a war onto the country that nobody has asked for. And at the same time, even supporters of Hezbollah are now questioning how well protected they are, how secure they are, when very important people within the organization could be targeted so directly, and when something as important as the supply chain of one of the most secretive groups is exposed and breached.
A lot of great points to pick up on there. Colin, let me bring you in on what Ayman was saying about the supply chain. So far, the trail of who made the pages goes cold in Budapest. What's your theory of where in the supply chain Israel managed to turn these pages into weapons?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I think all eyes are on Budapest at the moment. Taiwanese company involved. I think if you think about how meticulously planned this operation must have been, this is something the Israelis likely cooked up months ago, and I think on the heels of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, this is an advertisement for Maksad. It's a way for them to kind of refurbish their brand, which was tarnished after the attacks of October 7th. It's also likely not the end of this campaign. And so I would expect to see more in the coming days and weeks. And we could see attacks anywhere from Tehran to Beirut or beyond.
I do want to talk a little bit later when you say that this is an advertisement for Mossad, because we have to remember that among those killed is an 8-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy. That cannot be good publicity for any intelligence agency, the deaths of innocent civilians. But I want to also talk perhaps more importantly about what this does for Hezbollah's image. Firas, the US government's former deputy national intelligence officer on the Middle East, said this would easily be the biggest counterintelligence failure that Hezbollah has had in decades. Would you agree?
Elizabeth, it's hard to overstate the impact of what unfolded in Beirut yesterday. I've heard it being referred to as a digital Hiroshima as far as Hezbollah's communication capabilities is involved. No military organization can fight blindly. And what they've done, and what presumably the Mossad has done, is essentially taken out a significant portion of Hezbollah's command and control capabilities. So yes, on its own, this is a very significant blow. But when we take it also in the wider context, clearly Israel has the upper hand, has escalatory dominance, and established that in the past 11 months of conflict. Whether it is first targeting the southern suburbs of Beirut to assassinate Hamas's leader in Lebanon, then killing Hezbollah's own chief of staff in late July, being able to thwart Hezbollah's reported response to that by a preemptive attack with significant American help a few weeks ago, and now this. So Hezbollah has been dealt both a military blow, a technical blow, but more importantly, perhaps, as Ayman was highlighting, a very significant moral blow. And I think Hezbollah today faces a dilemma. If it responds, and responds forcibly, that might get Israel, and the Prime Minister in particular, Bibi Netanyahu, the pretext he's looking for to expand this war. And should their response be limited or not existent at all, that further invites escalation. So it's a very difficult moment for Hezbollah right now. And obviously, everybody's waiting to see what its Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah will have to say in a much-awaited speech tomorrow.
Ayman, I want to ask, you're a communications expert. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but how much of the situation are we in now with these pages being weaponized, would you say, is on Hassan Nasrallah himself, who made televised remarks earlier this year telling Hezbollah members to get rid of their smartphones, saying that they are more dangerous than Israeli spies? In hindsight, should he perhaps not have publicize those remarks?
I don't know if tomorrow Hassan Nasrallah will use his infamous "if I only knew" that he used after the 2006 July war, given the consequences that we know. Because this goes, as Firas mentioned, beyond just the technical capabilities. It's about identifying who the operatives are. Within seconds, before people realize what happened, thousands of images were circulating on social media. And therefore, people were able, through very simple open source intelligence, to gather data, pictures, information about people. Tracking CCTV is very easy. Tracking the movement of ambulances is very open. Records at hospitals contain the name, the details, personal details of patients. Changing this suddenly just to maintain the secrecy of some of the people might not be that easy. So the number of places today on social media, in the media, and in hospital records, in blood transfusion records, where names and details of very important people across such a secretive organization are made public, is not something easy to deal with. Even if a decision to actually strike or retaliate is taken, there are plenty of question marks about other moles or other gaps within the command and control structure that might be exposed as well. So this is today the kind of situation that everybody is grappling with and wondering what kind of response will happen in the next few days.
And Colin, before we talk more about how Hezbollah might respond to such an attack, one Hezbollah source said they believed that it was in response to an alleged assassination attempt on a former top Israeli defense official that was revealed by Israel on the same day.
Yeah, that certainly could be the motive for this. But in terms of timing, I've heard all sorts of different hypotheses that essentially, when this operation was initially planned, those who planned it believed that Israel would be at active war, all-out war with Hezbollah, and this would be kind of part of the opening stages or phases of that conflict. I've heard that, there was some rumblings that Hezbollah was learning about this, and the Israelis had to act before the plan was outed. And so I think the fact that we're here, that we're discussing it, that there's all sorts of hypotheses floating around is exactly what the Maksad was hoping for, right? Because it feeds into this kind of spy game, shadow war, kind of overlay that many have been following. And look, this is the continuation of the Israelis going to war in the shadows with Iran and Iran's proxies. And as we all know, that's been ongoing far before October 7th.
And Firas, we can't ignore that the attack came just hours after Israel announced it was broadening its aims in the Gaza war to include its fight against Hezbollah along the northern border. Is this attack, do you think, part of the new war goal? And how would war on its northern border make it any easier for the tens of thousands of Israelis who've been displaced from the north to return?
Yeah, Elizabeth, to echo what Colin just said, it's very hard to decipher at this point whether this is the opening salvo of a much broader war that's to come. And certainly late breaking news this morning that Israel is in fact moving tens of thousands of troops from Gaza up to that northern border with Lebanon. So they're making all the right moves that would have Hezbollah believe, and Iran too, from behind Hezbollah, that Israel is in fact preparing for war. Now, to your question, American diplomacy and the American administration has been very clear that Israel will not be able to achieve militarily what it has been unable to achieve diplomatically, that a war would bring only further devastation onto northern Israel, given Hezbollah's formidable arsenal of rockets and UAVs. Yes, we've talked much in this episode so far about how Israel has been able to successfully establish escalation dominance, how it's been able to penetrate Hezbollah using its superior intelligence capabilities. But Hezbollah is still the most powerful non-state actor in the world, and one that puts Hamas's capabilities to shame. So the American administration here differentiating itself from the Israeli position. I was in the room last week when Amos Hochstein, President Biden's envoy on this very issue, was having arguments and making the case against Israel broadening this war. And I think the fact that he had to travel to Israel earlier this week and that this attack literally came on the heels of him departing speaks volumes to the kind of daylight that we're seeing today between the American position and the Israeli position.
Ayman, it's not uncommon, is it, for the Israeli government to carry out considerable attacks, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Lebanon or elsewhere in the region, just after American officials leave Israel after a visit. We've seen this time and time again. Given everything that Firas has said about Hezbollah's capability being probably the strongest non-state actor in the world, do you believe that Israel does want war with Hezbollah? And how do people in Lebanon feel about it?
I cannot speak for what the Israeli government wants, but it's very clear that the current situation, the current status quo is not sustainable for any of the actors involved in this conflict. So politically, the situation in the north of Israel is not sustainable, and it's not sustainable either for the populations in South Lebanon. It's an area that is now completely destroyed. Tens of thousands of Lebanese people are also displaced in a country that lacks any kind of infrastructure. There are even now discussions, as of today, that the 2026 parliamentary elections in Lebanon will be postponed because of this situation. There are also question marks in Lebanon related to the timing of any major Israeli escalation. Will it happen before the November 5 elections in the US to force the hand of voters in the US, especially in case, for example, Kamala Harris's polls improve? Or will they wait for and actually contribute to potentially a defeat of Kamala Harris and have a more sympathetic administration in place? So today, people are reading the tea leaves when it comes to what can happen, what will happen. But what we know is that this attack further divided the Lebanese people, further weakened the social fabric in Lebanon. The level of social media disinformation that was spread methodically minutes after the attack, campaigns against the American University of Beirut's medical center, which was hosting hundreds of the people who were wounded, was being attacked by a social media campaign claiming that they got rid of the pagers themselves for their doctors in order to avoid such an attack, alluding to the fact that they knew something about it, which was complete fake news. It also was accompanied by a huge campaign to suddenly remove from social media every single kind of picture and image that came out of the attacks yesterday, while other segments of the Lebanese population were kind of celebrating what happened to a group they believed was responsible for assassinations in Lebanon and attacks on the Syrian people. This climate in Lebanon is not one that would allow a country to sustain any kind of additional crises, definitely not a large-scale war.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you're saying that this has further exposed divisions or led to divisions in the social fabric, because I was listening to the Lebanese health minister earlier, and he was trying to say the exact opposite. He was saying how the entire healthcare sector, although it's private, how it responded to look after the thousands of injuries, united, that it was a uniting factor in Lebanon. Colin, the attack itself, Ayman, I'll come back to you in just a moment, but I want to ask what your thoughts are on, again, the attack itself. Is it a war crime, given the indiscriminate nature of the attack? Israel could not have known that exactly who would have the pages, or that there would be no civilians around when they exploded, and yet they decided to Israel carried out the attack.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question. I'm not an international lawyer, so I'll leave the question of war crimes to them. But certainly, anytime someone plans an attack where there's a high likelihood that civilians will be killed, that's certainly something that would qualify or be eligible for scrutiny as to whether or not that's a war crime. You're right to point out that innocents were harmed, including children, and that's the conversation that I'm having with a lot of folks. But I guarantee you, that's not the conversation that's taking place in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, where the focus is likely on the quote-unquote success of the attack. And again, is this a kind of prelude to something something broader, we'll have to wait and see. And Hezbollah has made it clear that it will respond. In many ways, it's forced to respond, right? Because the operational security or the OPSEC of this group was compromised so significantly, it would be an embarrassment to not respond to this, would expose Hezbollah as weak. The trick becomes threading the needle where a Hezbollah response doesn't kind of further escalate and feed into this cycle that goes beyond just tit for tat and results in something more broad.
Yeah, Firas, I know you were saying earlier how Hezbollah is basically damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. It is so hard to get the exact calculation right in how it responds. But I also want to talk about Iran's lack of response, or so far at least, after the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran at the end of July. Has that emboldened Israel, would you say?
Oh, there's no doubt about that, Elizabeth. I mean, I think Israel is sort of looking across the chessboard here in the Middle East. And the message that keeps coming back time and again, escalation after escalation from Israel, is that both Iran and Hezbollah are just not ready for an all-out war, or at the very least, do not have a preference for it. Iran prefers to fight Israel 1,000 cuts at a time rather than delivering a knockout blow to it. It understands that it cannot deliver a knockout blow, that Israel is militarily superior. And so therefore, it uses this variety of non-state actors, these militant groups throughout the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, to, again, come at Israel 1,000 cuts at a time. So time and again, we see Iran pulling back from the brink, Hezbollah pulling back from the brink. And therefore, we heard the supreme leader in Iran only recently talk about the importance or the legitimacy of tactical retreat at times when your broader strategic objective is in danger. So one would hope that faced with the current choices that you alluded to, the damned if you do and damned if you don't, Hezbollah will take a different path. The U.S. administration has put forward an off-ramp to de-escalate the situation, a diplomatic off-ramp. Now, Hezbollah and Iran have time and again stressed that they want a ceasefire in Gaza first before they agree to the American diplomatic initiative. It would see Hezbollah withdraw a certain number of kilometers off the Israeli border. Israel would also vacate some of the 13 disputed lines along the border with Lebanon. And so there really is a path forward for diplomacy here. We don't know yet whether, faced with the current array of options, Hezbollah will choose to take that off-ramp. I would suspect, at a very minimum, it will have to undertake, as Colin said, some form of performative action to save face. And again, our hope is that the path to diplomacy will open thereafter.
Ayman, with what Firas is saying about a possible diplomatic off-ramp for Hezbollah, is there any chance that they would do that, given that they have said they will not stop their attacks because this is about Israel's war on Gaza?
Hezbollah remains a very strong actor when it comes to communication. At some point, if they decide to agree to a certain diplomatic solution, they will find a way to sugarcoat it, to present it to their audience. They did it when there was a maritime deal related to, the offshore oil and gas, exploration initiatives in the Mediterranean. It can happen. The most important issues for us are how we as Lebanese society will be able to cope with what is coming. Because I mentioned it earlier, while of course the medical sector behaved in such a noble way and professional way, the tensions run extremely deep. Nobody is ready. Nothing is ready for a major escalation of the conflict. And any room for a diplomatic solution must be followed. Perhaps the level of damage that yesterday's attack inflicted on Hezbollah, but also on our public morale in Lebanon, should be an incentive for a diplomatic solution. But at the same time, there are different parties to the conflict. The level of pressure that should be placed on the Netanyahu government in order to restrain some of their most extremist tendency is essential. Otherwise, not only Lebanon will pay the price, the entire region will be in a much more difficult situation very, very soon.
And Colin, we've seen that the US is not willing to use the leverage it has with Israel to stop the war on Gaza. But a war between Israel and Hezbollah would be much more destructive. Do you see it using the leverage it has to stop that conflict?
I often question how much leverage the United States does have over Israel. Now, certainly,
but Colin,
there's
why do you
weapons-
question that when they give billions of dollars in aid to Israel?
Well, maybe I'll reframe it and say they're not willing to use that leverage. You're absolutely right. And there are things the United States could do, but politically, especially in the year of a presidential election, they're not going to do that. The other piece to this is, as you pointed out earlier, Israel conducts these attacks as soon as a U.S. diplomat leaves. As an American citizen, I find that enraging. I think it's an embarrassment that oftentimes the Israelis act as that though they're the senior partner in the relationship. Netanyahu coming and giving speeches in the U.S. Congress criticizing our right to protest. So I'm often offended by the way the Israelis behave in that relationship. I wish the dynamics were different, but I don't think any politician is willing to, again, 7 weeks out from an election, start taking those steps, unfortunately.
Do you think, Colin, that Israel does want war with Hezbollah?
I think Benjamin Netanyahu might want war with Hezbollah. I'm not sure the IDF or the Israeli people do.
All right, I am afraid we have run out of time, but I want to thank all of our guests for this fascinating discussion. That is Ayman, Mhanna, Firas, Maksad, and Colin Clarke. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.